welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica and this is Rick's Reads. I did get a new microphone, so hopefully the sound quality of this video is a little bit better. We're going to be trying more trial and error here, but I'm hoping the sound of this video is a little bit better than my other videos because of this. But today I'm doing a video to recap the books that I read in November. I didn't read quite as many books in November as I was hoping. The second half of November I was traveling and thought that I would have a lot more time to read, but between the jet lag and the sightseeing or whatever, I just didn't. Plus on the plane rides, I had some long plane rides, but instead of reading my books that I brought, I decided to watch every single one of the Twilight movies, which I don't regret because I haven't watched those movies since they came out and they are excellent. So no regrets, but I didn't get through as many books as I was hoping to in November because of those decisions that I made on my own. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the books that I did get to read in November, starting with the first one that I finished, which was The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. This is my first Bret Easton Ellis that I've read. However, I did watch American Psycho, loved that movie, and actually American Psycho was the movie that led me to believe that I actually did like thrillers or psychological thrillers. So I've been anti any type of scary movie since I was a very young child, because when I was way too young, my cousins convinced me that we should all watch The Sixth Sense together, and I had nightmares for like months after that, so I stayed clear of any movie remotely scary after I completed that. And then a bit later I watched American Psycho and I was like, that was fun. I know it's not a scary movie, but it was a thriller, so it expanded the pool of movies that I was willing to watch and made me realize that I really like psychological thrillers. But anyway, so I probably should read American Psycho now, but this being my first Bret Easton Ellis and this being a thriller as well, I thought this was a really fun read. It is really fast-paced. It kind of hooks you in because it's a thriller, and the main character is pretty unlikable at times, and you're kind of confused about how you feel about them, what you believe about him versus kind of the people around him. You're like bought into him because he's the narrator, but also, you know, you kind of have some conflicting feelings about him. It's a fictional self-autobiography sort of, so the main character's name is Bret. It's a fictional story, but kind of based on the author's life. Growing up as like a very wealthy, rich kid in LA. And so there's kind of that backdrop of looking behind the curtain of like these overly privileged, like Nepo baby type high schoolers back in the 80s in LA. So it's kind of a cool backdrop, kind of interesting just from that perspective, but then it's a fun thriller. It's fun, it's fast-paced, it kind of hooked me in, and I really enjoyed reading this. I'm probably going to look into more Bret Easton Ellis in the future. I hadn't really been reading a lot of thrillers previously. I'd been reading a lot of literary nonfiction, fantasy, autobiographies prior to that, and I think that I might add some more thrillers into the rotation because I had a lot of fun with this book. The next book that I finished was what I talk about when I talk about Running by Haruki Murakami. This one I actually listened to the audiobook. I typically have kind of a hard time with a lot of audiobooks if they're not the right genre. I can't really listen to fiction or fantasy audiobooks. I just have a hard time kind of following the story because I'll get distracted. I'll be doing other things. However, this was sort of a little bit of an autobiography, or that style. It is about Murakami's life and how he got into running, and I find that autobiographies I can for some reason listen to as audiobooks, so I actually listened to this while I was running. And I thought that was really fun to listen to him talk about running and his relationship with distance running, but he also relates it to life and kind of how the discipline that he's learned from running has translated into other aspects of his life. And so that was kind of fun to do while running myself. So I had a fun time listening to this on audiobook as a person who has a hard time with audiobooks. So if you are also a person that has a hard time with audiobooks, I thought that this was a fun one to do, especially if you're a runner as well. And so I think that this is probably a book that's more interesting if you've done some distance running, but he does translate what he's learned from running to other lessons about life. So I think you could get something out of this book even if you're not a runner, but I think it's probably especially interesting if you've done running or triathlons or any type of like endurance sport. I think it would probably be a little bit more interesting, but I really liked this book. I liked the little nuggets. There were some lines in it that I wish I had highlighted somehow, but that were really fun. Something about how a lot of people when they're trying to be healthy, they basically try to overhaul their whole life and just like healthify every aspect of their life. And he was like, no, like I have an unwell mind and that's why I have to keep a healthy body. And people always ask me if I'm going to stop writing because there's something kind of toxic inherently about being a writer, and he's like, nope, my mind is unhealthy and that's why I work so hard to keep a healthy body. And I just thought that was like a really interesting way to think about life. Like it is potentially about balance. Like you don't need to overhaul everything and be like, I'm on this health kick, I need to do everything. It's like, hey, this part of my life is a little bit wacky and I'm not going to change it, so I'm going to like work on improving these aspects of it. I don't know, I thought it was an interesting way to think about things. So I really liked that book. I liked the lessons learned from him. He relates it a lot to his experience becoming a writer and kind of the lessons learned that can be applied to both writing and running, because there's a certain amount of discipline that is required for both of those. So interesting book if you're looking for kind of autobiography, life lessons, if you're a writer, but especially if you are an endurance athlete, I think it is enjoyable. Next, I read Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And I wanted to read this one because I have heard it come up in conversation a lot with My Dark Vanessa, which I have not yet read, but I have plans to read. And I wanted to read this first because a lot of people talk about it as kind of they come up in conversation a lot, and a lot of people will say that it kind of like paved the way for My Dark Vanessa. Obviously, the subject matter is disturbing in this book, but but the main character you're not supposed to sympathize with. Like he is cartoonishly a bad person, like he's cartoonishly evil. You're inside of his mind and he is not a good person. He's not being romanticized, he's not being glamorized. And despite that aspect of it, there were times when I found the book kind of hard to read because I just wasn't clicking with the subject matter. I was like, I don't like reading about like inappropriate relationships with children. That's not really something that I'm interested in reading about, but it is one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. Just like the sheer use of the English language is like nothing I've ever read before. Like the way that he has mastered the English language, Nabokov has mastered the English language, is just awe-inspiring. And especially, I think I read that English is like his 7th language or something, and obviously he speaks English better than like every single native English speaker that I have ever spoken to. So I think just for the way that the book is written, I like that I read this book. It was just so, there's some gross things that are being depicted about like the main character like daydreaming about murdering someone, and it's like related to like a ballet or something. Like it's just the imagery that he drums up, the vocabulary that he has, is the way that he writes humor into the main character's inner monologue. It's just a really, really well written book, which made me enjoy it despite the disturbing subject matter that I typically wouldn't really be interested in. So I'm happy that I read this book. I am eager to read My Dark Vanessa because I've heard really good things about that. And I'll be interested to see, once I read My Dark Vanessa, like to be able to compare these two, since I know they come up in conversation a lot together. The last book that I read in November, the last book that I completed in November, was Just Kids by Patti Smith. This was a really fun book. I didn't know too much about Patti Smith prior to reading this, so it was fun to learn about her and her relationship with her like life partner, kind of. It starts out like quasi-romantic, but really like it's a friendship for their whole lives with a famous photographer, Robert Mapplethorpe. So most of the book covers kind of their relationship, but also just what it was like for Patti growing up, or kind of as a young woman in New York City in the late 60s, early 70s, and hanging out at like the Chelsea Hotel. There's a lot of fun name dropping in this. She seems like a total it girl. So for that reason, it's just fun learning about what it was like hanging out with all of these like massive rock and literary celebrities in the late 60s and early 70s. So that was super fun. And then again, it was just, she's a great writer. So it was just fun to read for just the prose themselves and the way that she described life. So it's very romantic. Like it's like romanticizing being kind of like a broke artist when you're young and in New York. And I thought that it was really fun to read. It made me want to kind of do a deep dive on learning about some of these other artists that she mentions in the late 60s. I kind of have this thing where like when I get interested in something, I like to do a super deep dive into it and kind of get obsessed with it for a bit. So I feel like I might go into like a 60s deep dive for a bit and listen to a bunch of 60s music, and learn about some like kind of more about the art scene that was going on there, because this has piqued my interest. So anyway, it's a short list. Like I said, I didn't get to as many books as I was hoping in November, but those are the books that I did get to, and yeah, I thought it was a pretty good list. I enjoyed all of them for very different reasons, and yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books, if you have thoughts on them on your own, or recommendations for me based on any of the ones that I listed here. But yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on these too if you've read them. Yeah, so this was a November wrap up. Not that creative of a video. If you want to see a creative video, my friend KTB Reading just started a booktube as well, and she's an icon, and she just created a really fun video matching up books to her Spotify Wrapped for the year. So she recommended books based on each of the songs on her like top Spotify Wrapped, which is a really fun video. I will try to link it somewhere in here if I can. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.